Here's the night I won't forget. I found my daughter shivering on their porch at 32 degrees, while laughter floated from the fireplace inside. My first instinct wasn't to plead, it was to steady my breath, wrap her in my coat, and let decades of mother wisdom take the wheel. I documented the cold, turned the music off, and chose hospital's witnesses and paper over shouting matches. That moment was only the beginning. What came next would test Key's credit and the truth of who stands with you when the door stays closed. Before I continue the story, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment letting me know where you're watching from. The driveway crunched beneath my tires as I pulled up, headlights sweeping across the snow-rutted street. The clock on the dashboard read 6:23 p.m. Spokane's South Hill was quiet, houses trimmed with lights, wreaths glowing on doors. Yet on the porch of my son-in-law's home, where warmth spilled from curtained windows, I saw my daughter. Marissa sat hunched on a metal chair, arms wrapped around herself, the porch light haloing her breath. My heart dropped. I killed the engine and stepped into the chill, my boots sinking into slush. She didn't rise, didn't wave, just shivered eyes, half closed, lips pale. "Marissa," I whispered, crouching to touch her arm. Her skin was icy. My phone read 32 degrees. Christmas Eve and my daughter was outside while the laughter inside rolled against the glass. I shrugged off my coat and wrapped it around her shoulders, pulling my scarf up beneath her chin. She tried to speak, but her teeth chattered. I slipped her suitcase beneath her feet to keep them off the wet porch, then rubbed her hands between mine. Through the frosted window shadows danced people raising glasses, a fire crackling. Not one of them turned toward the door. The knob was stiff with frost when I touched it. Locked. I held my palm there, feeling the contrast metal biting cold, while warmth bled through the wood. My daughter was freezing 10 feet from a blazing hearth. A chorus of carols rose muffled. I steadied my breath. I wouldn't panic. She needed me to be steady, not dramatic. A car slowed by the curb. Callista, the neighbor, stepped out holding a pie box that steamed in the cold. She froze when she saw us. "Do you need help?" she asked softly. I nodded. "Please note the time, what you're seeing. That's all I ask." She hesitated, then came closer, eyes darting toward the house where music swelled. I accepted the pie, set it on the railing, proof that someone else had witnessed this divide, warmth inside, cold neglect outside. I lifted Marissa, gently resting her against me, shielding her from the wind. My phone clicked photos of her shivering, of the porch light thermometer, of the frost clinging to her hair. I didn't call 911, not yet. I prepared. Documentation options, next steps. I was her mother. I had to keep my mind clear. From inside, laughter burst louder, glasses clinking. I bit down on my anger. I would not bang on that door, would not plead to be admitted into a house that chose exclusion. I whispered to myself, I will not beg to be let inside my own child's life. Instead, I inventoried urgent care, still open, a non-emergency line, saved in my phone, my car idling ready. Callista returned from her car holding out a blanket. "It's quick," she said, her hands trembling. I accepted it, draped it over Marissa's knees. "Thank you." "Could I have your phone number?" I asked. She nodded, scribbling it on a scrap from her bag. A small act of courage, quiet but real. I steadied my daughter once more. The porch light flickered as the doorbell camera blinked red. I pressed my palm to the frozen handle, imprinting the moment. Behind the walls, they laughed. Out here, I bore witness, and in that instant I drew the line. I closed my palm around the freezing handle and made myself a promise: tomorrow I won't knock, I will act. At first light, the doorbell's tiny LED blinked frost alert, and I took note. The porch rails still wore a thin crust of white, the kind that sparkles only when the sun is low. My breath came out in clouds, and I held my phone close to capture the glow from the sensor. Marissa was in the car with the heater on seat, tilted back, her face pale but calm. I had checked her pulse twice in the last hour. The fact that she was still resting quietly gave me courage. I tapped the doorbell app. The screen lit up with a small, insistent log, time-stamped alerts, each marking the freezing night. The system didn't exaggerate. It never did. The words "frost alert" pulsed, each one aligned with the very hours when laughter had spilled from the living room inside. I snapped screenshots, making sure the date and hour were clear. No sound, no intrusion, just what the device itself had captured. Evidence that needed no voice but its own. The door creaked. A sliver of warmth rushed out, smelling faintly of cinnamon and smoke. Isolde stood framed in it, her shawl draped neat across her shoulders. Her tone was clipped, almost casual. She only needed some fresh air. You know how young people get. Fresh air at 32 degrees. The words pressed against my chest like ice. I kept my voice level. Fresh air is one thing. Frost is another. I didn't raise my tone. I didn't need to. The glow of the LED, the steady log on my screen, spoke louder than I ever could. She gave a faint shrug, as though the night had been nothing more than a small inconvenience. "We had guests," she said. "It was busy." "Guests don't cancel winter," I replied. My fingers tightened around the phone, but I smiled a small, practiced smile. The kind you use when you're telling a truth that can't be softened anymore. I explained carefully that Marissa was recovering and needed quiet, that for today she wouldn't come inside. I would bring her things home later, I said, once I had a list and the time. It wasn't a request, it was a boundary. Isolde hesitated. Her eyes flickered as though she were weighing whether to challenge me, but the phone in my hand made her still. I asked, when she first noticed Marissa on the porch, if anyone had brought a blanket. She didn't answer quickly, and that pause was its own reply. My thumb moved quick, capturing the screen once more. The alerts blinked the exact time. I closed the conversation on my terms. "We'll pick up her things this afternoon," I said. My voice stayed even, no accusation sharp enough to bounce back. She gave a curt nod and shut the door. The porch fell quiet again. I looked at the LED, still blinking like a heartbeat, steady and undeniable. My resolve matched it, beat for beat. I opened the Notes app on my phone and typed a single line, "Device truth first, then words." I walked back to the car, the crunch of frost beneath my boots steady as a metronome. Inside, Marissa stirred, but I whispered only "rest." My eyes drifted back to the door. Courtesy had been spent. The next step would be naming what had happened, plain and unhidden. The LED blinked again, and I knew the time for silence was over. I reached in, tapped the speaker icon, and shut the music off before I spoke. The carols died mid-verse, leaving only the sound of my own breath and the faint crunch of ice under my shoes. The laughter inside faltered. For a moment, there was nothing but silence pressing against the glass. I had already settled Marissa in the car, wrapped in heat from the vents, her head resting against the window. She was safe, at least for the time being. I locked the doors, slid my phone into my palm, and returned to the porch with every intention measured. My fingers were steady. No improvising, no raised voice, no begging, just clarity. The house lights glowed warm, too bright against the gray morning frost. When the silence inside stretched, I drew a line across it with words I had saved all night. "This is domestic abuse." The phrase was not shouted. It was even almost calm, a mic drop in the stillness. The sound traveled through the quiet like a stone hitting glass, cracking the air. The living room beyond the doorway shifted. Isolde's face appeared half-shadowed, lips tight. "It was just fresh air," she said. Her words landed soft, almost casual, as if describing a walk in the park. "Fresh air at 32 degrees, I countered, holding her gaze. For a child wrapped in slush shivering, I didn't need to argue. I had the numbers. My phone glowed with the frost alerts logged from the doorbell system. 6:42 p.m., 7:15, 7:58. The device didn't lie, and neither did the photographs I'd taken. "You know we had guests." She tried again, smoothing her sweater sleeve as though tidying the conversation itself. "Guests don't cancel winter," I said simply. The phrase felt like a stone placed neatly on the porch rail, undeniable, steady, heavy with truth. Behind her, the living room flickered with the light of a fire. Then Dorian appeared. He stepped into the doorway, his body angled like a guard, his shoulders squared chin, tilted as though my presence were an inconvenience. "You can't just accuse us," he began. I didn't step forward. "I didn't need to. I don't need your agreement," I said, voice even. "The ER will document it." His jaw tightened, but he said nothing more. The doorway remained blocked, but the battleground had already shifted. I lifted my phone screen bright with the night's log of alerts. "I've already noted witnesses and time," I said. "Not a threat. A record. A reminder that facts were no longer theirs to edit." There was no point in prolonging the scene. I kept my voice level as I spoke the next step. "We'll come back this afternoon for her belongings with notice. Nothing more." With that, I pulled back from the threshold. I tapped the non-emergency number already saved, reported a welfare check, and noted the reference number. Official comm logged. By the time I guided the car down the icy street, Marissa was already half asleep against the seat. The hospital stood less than 15 minutes away. I parked under the fluorescent overhang, carried her inside, and let the triage nurse take over. Skin temperature low, pulse thin, hypothermia, risk noted. The click of the wristband fastened around her wrist was louder than it should have been, neutral, time-stamped beyond denial. The morning passed in small reassurances, warm fluids, steady vitals, a nurse's firm nod. Discharge instructions in my bag paperwork signed, each page a shield. When I finally texted a neutral message about retrieving her things, it was without emotion, just logistics, just the next step. I closed my notebook with a single line written at the bottom, "Device truth and hospital truth." That was enough for now. The hospital band was still warm on her wrist when I remembered the red tablecloth and what might be hidden beneath it. I went back for the essentials and for whatever they thought I'd be too polite to find. The sky had shifted to that winter gray that flattens everything, the kind that makes the snow look like paper left in the rain. I parked at the curb within the pickup window I'd texted, snapped a photo of the dashboard clock, and tucked my phone into my glove. In my other hand, a folded checklist, ID, meds, coat charger, toiletries. An empty canvas tote hung from my arm. Nothing dramatic, just errands for survival. Isolde opened the door a careful inch wider than yesterday, chin-lifted sweater immaculate. Somewhere behind her, Dorian hovered half-turned, as if he might be called to a different task at any second. I kept my voice calm. "I'll be quick." She granted a tight nod, the kind people use when they're pretending choices aren't being made. I stepped in only as far as needed and set the tote by the entry rug. My thumb lifted my phone not to record, only to timestamp the items I picked up. One photo per thing, no commentary. The house smelled like coffee and cinnamon brooms. Carols were off, but the fire still cracked as if warmth were a private privilege. In the dining area, the holiday table looked staged for a catalog. The red cloth was pressed to perfection, corners, aligned, placemats squared. I lifted the corner closest to the sideboard to reach for Marissa's purse I'd seen last night. The leather strap had slid under a place setting. When my fingers brushed it, the placemat shifted, and a stiff edge of paper kissed my knuckles. Not the weight of a bill, heavier, bound. I slid the placemat back half an inch. A stapled packet lay beneath dust, caught along its edge, where the polish didn't reach. The top page bore a title printed in a thick, at-home font, household agreement. No letterhead, no signatures on the front. My breath stayed even. I lifted the placemat enough to read without moving the stack phone hovering close. Click. A photo of the cover with the date on screen. The second page was worse than the title suggested. Duties tied to efforts toward growing the family. Penalties for withholding during family events. Behavioral expectations including warmth and helpfulness regardless of mood. Initial lines marked A.W. and D. Whitlock. A blank line labeled Spouse Consent. My daughter's name printed beneath it, the signature line empty. I took each page in order, edges untouched, screen capturing the date in the corner of each frame. Policy language for a marriage invented at a dining table that had just served turkey and applause. The dust was proof it hadn't been drafted this morning. I lowered the placemat to exactly where it had been and slid the purse free. In the kitchen, I found her pill organizer beside a chipped mug. Monday through Sunday labeled in a shaky hand that wasn't hers. I photographed the organizer where it sat, then placed it in the tote. In the hall bath, her face cream and a worn toothbrush lay in a ceramic cup. I added them after a quick shot of the countertop. Walking back through the living room, I noticed something wedged between the armchair and the wall, a small gift-wrapped box, corners blunted from being pressed. The label had curled, but I could still read it, from Mom, my handwriting. The post office sticker showed last week's date, the Spokane zip, half scuffed. I took a photo of the gift exactly as it was, shadows and all, then left it where it lay. Some things needed to remain in place until the right eyes saw them. Was this gift ever brought out? I asked, my tone level. Isolde didn't miss a beat. It must have slipped behind the chair, she said, smoothing nothing with her palm. The postmark is last week, I answered. That was all. I returned to the list. Charger from the bedroom outlet. Therapy appointment card from the nightstand, folded twice and tucked into a book of poems. Another photo before it went into the tote. Dorian drifted into the doorway as if pulled by curiosity more than concern. "You're taking a lot of pictures," he said lightly. "I'm taking care," I replied, neither defensive nor apologetic. "If we miss anything, I'll send a list." In their bedroom, I kept to the edges, a respectful arc that betrayed nothing and missed nothing. Top drawer insurance card and state ID slid into a clear sleeve. I snapped a quick shot of the drawer before and after an empty rectangle to prove I hadn't left anything vital behind. The mantle with the family photos caught the corner of my eye, but I didn't give it more than a glance. Their fireplace glow meant nothing to me now. Warmth wasn't a flame. Warmth was how you treated people who couldn't defend themselves. Back in the hall, I paused once more at the dining table, as if confirming the cloth was smooth. Under the placemat, the packet waited like a splinter in painted wood. I looked at the chair where the gift had slipped, then at the narrow shadow it had carved. My phone buzzed an automated cloud backup confirmation. Good. At the threshold, I lifted the tote, now steady with things that mattered: medicine identity instructions, a small card with a therapist's name. I met Isolde's eyes. "I'll send a list of anything missing," I said, "and I've documented what I needed to." She held my gaze, but her pupils flicked table chair door. "We were only trying to keep order," she said, barely above a whisper, as if the house itself might overhear. "Order doesn't erase people," I answered. Then I stepped out, letting the door rest into its frame without a slam. In the car, I set the tote on the passenger floor and opened my notebook on the steering wheel. Upload S4 photos, confirm timestamps. Leave hidden gift for now. Maintain chain of custody. Draft neutral follow-up text about any remaining essentials. Save copies to hard drive. I checked off each line as my phone chimed its little confirmations. Before I pulled away, my eyes slid back to the window over the sink. Through the glass, I could see a cookbook lying open on the counter, its spine cracked in the middle of a familiar page. I couldn't read the title from the car, but I knew that smudge of cinnamon in the margin. Marissa's Habit, a thumbprint that turns into a spice print after pie night. A name in neat marker had been written at the top of that page, and a whiter rectangle beneath it told the rest of the story. Someone had peeled away my daughter's handwriting and replaced it with a different author. The last thing I saw before I shut the door was a cookbook on the counter with my daughter's handwriting erased under someone else's name. I flipped it open to the apple pie page and recognized the smudge of cinnamon that only Marissa makes. The print name at the top read, "Family Cookbook by Isolde and Abigail," but the page itself told a quieter story. Under the bold marker, the paper rose and fell in shallow ridges, the way paper does after someone peels off tape. I let the book rest flat on the counter and angled my phone so the late afternoon light caught the grain. One photo of the title, one of the apple pie page, another tight frame on. I turned a page, then two. In the margins of pumpkin bread, reduce nutmeg. Next to sugar cookies, bake 12 min last shelf. Those were our old phrases, the shorthand of a mother and daughter testing batches in a too-warm kitchen years ago. The corner of the pie page curled more than the others, a sign it had been turned and turned. I took photos of the indentations where cursive once pressed hard loops, long tails on eyes, the little hook she puts on the letter T. Ink can be traced over. Pressure cannot. Isolde passed the doorway with a folded dish towel, her chin angled as if the air had a temperature she preferred. I nodded. She kept moving. I closed the cookbook and placed it exactly where it had been, the spine aligned with the cutting board, the red cloth beneath unwrinkled. No statements, no lectures. My camera roll would do the speaking, later timestamps, layered in the corner like polite chaperones. Back home, my apartment smelled faintly of old coffee and pine from the wreath the church ladies insisted I take. I set the tote on the table, opened my laptop, and signed into the photo archive I keep for my daughter's recipe cards. Years scrolled past. 2016, 2017, 2018, little rectangles of note cards with butter stains and cheerful doodles. I pulled the apple pie card from 2017 beside today's photo on the screen. Same upward lean to her cursive. Same abbreviated TSP, the P like a dandelion stem. I drafted an email to the household address. Subject, attribution corrections, family cookbook. I kept the tone even. I attached the sheet and a second page, noting where Marissa's name had been removed, and another added. Please list Marissa as co-author and pause new copies until corrected, I wrote. This is a straightforward attribution matter. I CC'd my attorney, Ruth, with a single-line record only. Then I hit send and let the quiet reclaim the room. The tote still sat half open. I reached for the purse and unzipped the inner pocket. Inside, folded once, was an ATM slip. The bank logo at the top wasn't hers. The timestamp matched the same weekend I'd transferred money into her account. Location, a machine off Maple near the office where Dorian sometimes consults. I set the slip beside last month's bank statement and took a photo that showed both documents in the same frame, today's paper and last month's printout, like two neighbors talking over a fence. At my desk, I opened a spreadsheet and typed 3 lines dates of my transfers, amounts, locations of the withdrawals that followed within 48 hours. The pattern didn't shout, it repeated. Friday afternoons, the same 2 ATMs. Always within a day or two, rounding down the balance by the exact sum of my deposits, plus a little extra in fees. I added a simple map screenshot with pins at the 2 machines and at Dorian's office, then saved the file with a neutral name, Household Finance D Notes.pdf. I could have called. I didn't. I emailed Ruth instead, attaching the proof packet, the cookbook comparison, the ATM photo, the brief timeline. My note was short, establishing a clean record of authorship and a preliminary financial pattern. No demands yet. Then I drafted a second message to the in-laws. Going forward, I'll handle finances directly with Marissa. No accusation. Just a boundary drawn like a line of painter's tape, useful if everyone chose to respect it. Dusk pushed against the windows. The neighborhood went violet, then blue. I made tea and set a bowl of soup to warm on the stove the way I do when there's nothing left to say to anyone who won't listen. On the table lay the smallest things that carry the most weight: a hospital discharge sheet, a therapist's card, a purse that still smelled faintly of Marissa's lavender hand cream. I slid the discharge sheet into a folder labeled Winter and tucked the therapist's card into my wallet so I wouldn't fumble. The phone buzzed. A new voicemail icon winked on the screen, then a text followed with a case number from the non-emergency call I'd placed the day before. Officer available to document porch conditions. May we stop by this evening, it read. I breathed out slowly and typed back, yes. My thumb hovered a second, then added doorbell LED still blinking frost alert at 3:44 p.m. I washed my cup, wiped the counter, and checked the backup confirmations one more time. Each green check felt like a small exhale. This was not a war. It was housekeeping of the most adult sort, putting names back where they belong, keeping heat where it is needed, following the money where it actually goes. When the knock finally came, it was unhurried, like someone who had already decided to be kind. I opened the door. By evening, the case number pinged my phone, and the officer asked if he could stop by to document the porch itself. Corbin stood at my doormat with a calm nod and a clipboard, and I let the evidence do the talking. He didn't come with flashing lights or a heavy hand, just steady shoes on salted concrete, and the kind of voice that doesn't rise above the December wind. I sat him at my kitchen table, the same table where I used to grade Marissa's high school essays. One by one, I laid out the papers, ER discharge instructions, photos of the frost alert, screenshots of the doorbell log. He glanced down, clicked his pen, and said, "Case number B2TUR12." The numbers steadied me more than his tone. A record now existed that no one could erase with a wave of a hand or a family excuse. He wrote carefully, asking only for times and facts. I gave him nothing more, nothing less. At the end, he slid a carbon copy across the table. My name printed his signature, fresh the paper, already official. We drove separately the way adults do when there's nothing secret in motion. At the in-laws' house, his camera light blinked against the porch. He photographed the chair, still faintly rimmed in frost, and the railings that had carried the night's weight. He logged the surface temperature with a small digital gauge, nodding once at the LED still flashing. One polite knock, the kind that leaves no dent but demands respect. Isolde opened the door, her face careful lined not just by age but by calculation. I kept my hands visible, my toad at my side. I need 2 things for Marissa, I said evenly. Her duplicate therapy card and her winter gloves. Corbin's pen moved in the corner of my eye, noting time and tone. She fetched the items in silence, her husband's shadow hovering behind her shoulder. Dorian stepped forward, jaw tight, stance wide. I didn't meet the posture, I met the point. From this moment on, I said calm as the snow will communicate by email. No calls. Corbin cleared his throat, redirecting the tension back to his notes. Did anyone offer a blanket last night? The silence hung heavy enough to frost the room again. He wrote something down. I didn't need to. From my tote, I drew a sealed envelope. Inside a letter ending any informal financial support through this household, and a check made out for 0 more zeros. Memo line future payments to Marissa directly only. I placed it on the entry console. No drama, just delivery. The letter inside spelled it out, new account, in Marissa's name, direct deposits receipts, required for care. No more siphoning under the cover of household expenses. Corbin watched me lay it down. He signed his log that it had been received. Paper over posture. I thanked him before the cold could settle too deep. He handed me a property return receipt template, the kind officers carry to close loops cleanly. I tucked Marissa's gloves into my tote, nodded once to the door frame, and walked back into the salted night. Snow ticked against the porch light. Behind me, silence stretched longer than their denials ever could. At home, I scanned the acknowledgement slip into a cloud folder labeled Door 32 Derive. I typed a note beneath it. No blanket offered when asked. Silence noted. Then I opened my email draft to council subject line. Ready, logs and witness ready. The night ended not with shouting, not with slammed doors, but with a quiet pivot. Tomorrow would begin in court, not in their living room. The clerk slid the file back under the glass, and I watched the stamp come down like a gavel. Black letters pressed into red ink, inadmissible. The word bled across the margin of my typed note, where I had described the sound of carols and laughter while my daughter shivered on their porch. My stomach tightened, but I kept my face neutral. A mother's words, they were saying, didn't count. Not here. Not unless another system had blessed them. I drew in a breath through my nose and folded the paper back into my folder, careful not to crumple it. I steadied my voice. What business records would the court accept? I asked. The clerk, professional but distant, rattled off terms, affidavits from custodians, certified device logs, service provider certifications. I nodded slowly, writing down each phrase in block letters on the pad I'd brought. I refused to leave with only rejection. I would leave with a map. On the courthouse steps, the air stung sharper than the red ink. I dialed Malis, my attorney. She answered on the first ring, crisp, ready. I explained what had happened inside. Forget the personal recordings, she said firmly. We'll go through subpoena. Doorbell, smart home devices, business records exception. ER documents too, but with custodian affidavit. That's the lane we stick to. I leaned against the stone wall, phone pressed to my cheek, and exhaled. The path had narrowed, but it was still a path. Back inside, on a wooden bench, worn smooth by decades of other stories, I opened my pad again. On one side of the page, I wrote, "What's out? Personal audio. Subjective notes. Any she said, he said." On the other, "What's in? Timestamps, device logs, ER vitals, certified declarations." I drew a thick line between the two columns. It was less about my outrage now, more about order. I reminded myself that adults don't always win by emotion. They win by keeping their paper trail clean. By mid-morning, I was back at my desk in the lobby, laptop open. I typed an email to Malis device serial service provider, info, doorbell account, ID, police case, B2412. Within minutes, she replied with draft language for subpoenas, attaching a form for records custodian declarations. The plan looked dull in text, but it was what courts respected. Dull could win. Dull could protect Marissa. At noon, my phone pinged with an HOA email from the in-laws subdivision. The subject line, noise complaint, Christmas Eve. My pulse ticked faster as I read several residents reported loud music and voices after 10 p.m. Please be considerate of guests and neighbors. I read it twice, then a third time. The hypocrisy was sharp as vinegar. They worried about noise while my daughter froze outside their door. I didn't rage. I just let the irony sink into me like another kind of evident social proof of a house more concerned with etiquette than humanity. I typed my reply carefully, 3 sentences only. Acknowledge receipt. Attach police case number. Note that a welfare check had been logged for that same night, request their incident log for the time window. No extra words, no fire. Just facts turning their own message into corroboration. That evening, I labeled a new folder on my desktop, Admissible. Inside, I placed the subpoena drafts, Melissa's custodian plan, and the HOA email chain. At the top of my notepad in fresh ink, I wrote a single line, device truth first. Then I set a reminder on my phone to collect Marissa's hidden gift later in the week with a witness. The case had narrowed from what I felt to what I could prove, but that was enough. Tomorrow, a different seal would land, this time from the state bar, and it wouldn't be red. The letterhead was embossed, the tone was neutral, and it said exactly what I needed. Complaint received. At my desk that afternoon, I held the printed page steady under the lamp. The State Bar acknowledgement gave me a file number and outlined in cool, bureaucratic phrasing what came next. Exhibits had to be submitted through official custodians. Nothing personal, nothing improvised. That suited me fine. I didn't need sympathy in cursive. I needed authority in black ink. The red stamp from yesterday had been a stop sign. This seal was a door. I called Melis right away. The bar has logged it, I told her. She didn't waste words, just confirmed the path forward. We'll subpoena the doorbell company. The ER will release records once we have custodian signatures. Keep every communication clean. No personal notes, no conjecture. Her voice was sharp but calm, like a teacher who expects her student to do the work. I scribbled device truth first across the margin of my notebook and underlined it twice. Before closing the folder, I spoke to a bar intake specialist by phone. Their tone was practice measured. They asked for identifiers, police case, B242 ER visit number, timeline of the porch incident. I supplied each detail with the same calm cadence. When they asked for supporting context, I mentioned the cookbook credit issue, but made clear it wasn't my central claim. Our focus is influence, misuse, intimidation patterns, I said, not recipes. The intake officer agreed. Precision was the watchword. By mid-afternoon, I turned from paperwork to something more human. St. Matthew's Community Church sat only 10 minutes from my apartment, its foyer faint with coffee and pine cleaner. Pastor Elena recognized me from food drives, her face open and kind. I asked if their Christmas Eve program list could show who attended and when they left. She didn't blink. Let me check the usher log. Her finger traced the handwritten entries. Whitlock party arrived 6:55 p.m., left 7:25 p.m. Snow still dusted their coats, she remembered. Their children had tugged at sleeves, restless to leave. She promised that if asked formally, she could provide a neutral attendance note. A simple piece of paper, yet it pinned their presence to the hour my daughter sat outside in the frost. Before leaving, I lit a small vigil candle at the side chapel. I didn't pray aloud. I simply let the flame steady my thoughts while I repeated the list in my head: subpoenas to serve custodian forms, HOA log request. The flame was softer than the cold beep of a doorbell, but steadier too. I knew many of my generation would understand sometimes you light a candle not for faith, but for focus. Stepping outside into the winter dusk, I saw Callista crossing the lot with grocery bags. She paused, recognizing me, and without prompting repeated what she had seen on Christmas Eve, my daughter shivering on the porch, my coat draped over her shoulders. "If you need me to write it down, I will," she said. I thanked her, careful not to burden her with more than she offered, but inside I felt something settle. A neighbor's quiet words could weigh more than family denial. Back home, I opened a new folder on my desktop and titled it Civic Records. Into it went the bar complaint file number, the draft subpoena language, the note from Pastor Elena and Callista's contact. The HOA reply was still pending, but the circle was forming. I typed a short message to Marissa. "You are not alone. I am building a circle that doesn't run hot and cold." Then I set my pen down, knowing tomorrow would bring another test. Because by morning, Dorian would try to reclaim the narrative with one object a key, and the claim that it was his to keep. I set the spare key on the counter between us and slid the property receipt across the granite like a line I wouldn't cross. The kitchen smelled faintly of cinnamon and bleach, the kind of mix that says company's coming and something needs covering. I uncapped my pen and kept my voice level. "This is a neutral pickup," I said. "We're staying on the list." The key had a brittle plastic tag upstairs. I placed it beside the signature block so no one would pretend not to see it. The weak winter sun fell in a pale rectangle across the island, making the forms brighter than the faces standing over them. I read the inventory aloud, each word steady. Winter boots, therapy card duplicate, phone charger, photocopy of the apple pie page with proper attribution noted, and the gray scarf. Dorian tried small talk about the weather, then about how families hit bumps. I didn't look up. "We're here for items," I answered. "Please initial as you hand them." He set the boots down with a soft thud and initialed the line. The charger followed cord wrapped too tight, like someone had been angry at it. The therapy card wasn't in the wallet as promised. Isolde went to look and came back with a duplicate from the drawer by the stove, breath quick, smile thin. Dorian tapped the spare key with one finger, the nail clicking lightly. "That stays," he said. "House policy." I met his eyes only long enough to make the point land. "It's Marissa's key," I said. "The locks change at noon. This is written notice." I took a second envelope from my tote and slid it beside the receipt. On top, the new mailing address and a single sentence. "All communications in writing. No phone calls." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The rules could speak without heat. "Please print your name as observer," I said to Isolde. She hesitated, then took the pen and wrote slowly each letter, careful as if neatness could change meaning. I initialed the lines for collected items. Dorian initialed the handovers. I photographed the sheet on the counter with my phone's lock screen showing the time. No angles, no tricks, just proof that paperwork existed where voices could later forget. The room had that odd quiet of people trying not to make sound forks, stacked gently, a drawer nudged closed with a hip. "There's one more thing," I said, a small gift box labeled, "From Mom." The air tightened. I didn't look for permission, I asked for location. Behind the armchair, Isolde said too quickly. We walked to the living room. The box was still wedged where I'd first seen it days ago, a sliver of ribbon peeking like a tongue bitten shut. I took a photo in place, then lifted it out and set it on the kitchen island beside the receipt. Another photo, the label, clear the postmark visible under the tape. Then I placed it in my tote and noted the time on the form. "Recovered," I said. "Thank you." Isolde offered a line that had been practiced smooth. There were misunderstandings. Holidays do that. I capped my pen. "Keys or trust," I said. Trust wasn't honored. I wrote a final note on the receipt, access to residence and banking revoked. Communications by email only. I didn't add more. A sermon is what people give when they don't have paper. Dorian signed the last line with a quick, irritated slash. I tore the duplicate copy and laid it on the counter for them, then picked up the spare key and dropped it into my pocket. It felt heavier than metal, should like it had been carrying other people's stories. "Thank you for handing over the items," I said, and meant the grammar if not the sentiment. No eye contact contest, no parting shot. I zipped the tote, lifted it with both hands, and walked to the door. Behind me, the house hovered between protest and silence, and somehow chose silence. The locksmith came at noon, as promised. He wore a wool cap and a quiet competence I recognized in myself. Snow flurried in fine lines past the hallway window while he worked the new deadbolt into place. I laid the upstairs key on a paper towel. He dropped it into a small disposal pouch with a practiced flick. "Keep the receipt in a safe spot," he said, tapping the invoice. I filed it in my folder labeled Door 32 Degrawf with the police incident card. Beneath that, I wrote 3 short sentences on a yellow sheet, receipt signed. "Gift recovered, locks changed." It wasn't poetry, but it was the kind of language that holds in bad weather. I texted a neutral confirmation to the household email and copied my attorney items, retrieved per attached receipt. Locks changed at 12:07 p.m. Future communications by email only. No adjectives. Adjectives invite arguments. I placed the gray scarf on the back of Marissa's chair and set the small box in front of it, ribbon facing her seat like a welcome sign. The room felt warmer without a single degree moving on the thermostat. For a moment I stood with my hand on the chair, the way I had stood with my hand on that freezing doorknob 2 nights before. Back then the cold had told me where the line was. Now the paper did. I thought of the doorbell's little LED blinking its truth into a hard night, and of the candle that steadied me yesterday, and how both kinds of light do the same job. When you let them, they show edges. They keep you from wandering back into a room that won't hold you. On my way to the kitchen, a glossy bundle lay on the doormat neighborhood newsletter, heavy with ads and smiling faces. I tucked it under my arm and poured a glass of water, then set the newsletter on the counter. The headline on the front page credited a holiday bake sale recipe to the wrong hands. I didn't sigh. I reached for a pen. Some names need moving and some don't. I knew which kind this was. By evening, a different paper would surface, one that tried to rename my daughter's work again, this time in print. I had the folder ready and the ink in my pen hadn't run out yet. The newsletter lay on my doormat, heavy with gloss and a headline that credited the wrong hands. I set my tote down, wiped a thin line of road grit from the envelope flap, and opened to the center spread. Holiday feast traditions that warm a city. There it was, the lattice my daughter cuts, with a ruler, the faint cinnamon smear where she always taps the spoon once before wiping it on a paper towel. Under the photo, the caption thanked Isolde for family hosting and named the recipe as hers. I didn't exclaim. I took time-stamped photos, the cover with date, the masthead, the page number, the caption. The light outside had gone the color of aluminum. Inside, my lamp burned steady over the desk where the folder labeled Civic Records waited like a clear runway. I studied the masthead. Editor-in-Chief, Managing Editor, a general inbox, and a small note, corrections and clarifications, send page issue date and proof of claim. That was enough. I called the main line. A receptionist answered with a voice that had triaged 1,000 small-town quarrels. I explained plainly that a recipe credit appeared to be wrong and that I had dated material to show authorship. We do corrections on the site the same day if the evidence is clear, she said. Print takes a cycle. Email the attribution packet to the corrections address and copy the managing editor. I thanked her. Process is oxygen when people try to fog a room. At the desk, I opened my archives. First, the glossy page shot. Then a side-by-side of Marissa's recipe card from 2018, the way she writes TSP without the dot, the loop on her Y. I added the photos I'd taken yesterday of the cookbook page, where her name had been traced over, and the cinnamon smudge, only she leaves. At the end, I typed a single paragraph. The attached images show my daughter Marissa as author and stylist of the apple pie pictured. Please correct the online caption to credit her, and schedule a printed editor's note in your next issue. I saved the PDF with a clean name and checked each page again. No adjectives, just mirrors held at the right angles. I sent the email to the editor and managing editor, subject line precise, attribution correction request, winter issue P7. I kept the body courteous and short, requested an online fix tonight and a printed note next month. I copied Malis so the tone would stay in the lane we'd chosen, and I added Pastor Elena as a reference point for the Christmas Eve timeline, not because a church should judge food, but because time is a net, and the truth swims better when lines cross. The managing editor called within 15 minutes. I put the phone on speaker and took notes by hand so my tone would follow my pen. Our content was provided by a community source, she said carefully. We rely on submitters to represent authorship. I answered without heat. Your policy says attribution follows authorship, not submission. The packet shows dated authorship and unique styling markers, and the cookbook photos show an earlier erasure. I'm asking for a correction, not a takedown. She asked for a moment, then for permission to share my packet with their contributor. You may, I said. Please also send me your contributor release on file for this item. Silence hummed for 3 beats. We'll review within the hour, she said. An email pinged from a different direction, the doorbell vendor. Preliminary event log for device SN attached. A custodian had pulled entries that showed motion at 7:39 p.m. and 7:51 p.m. on Christmas Eve, with ambient temperature at the sensor reading near freezing. It was a small square of certainty in a week of people stretching definitions like taffy. I forwarded the log to Malis with one line: business records received. Aligns with church times. I could almost hear her nod through the quiet. Device truth first. People follow later. Another ping the editor. The subject line read like a small door opened. Pending correction, winter issue P7. In the body, she wrote that they would correct the online caption tonight to credit Marissa properly and schedule a printed editor's note in the next issue. She added that they would request clarification from their contributor regarding the cookbook and thanked me for the clear documentation. I filed the email in Civic Records Corrections and printed a copy for the physical folder, because paper still calms my hands in a way screens do not. I walked the newsletter back to the kitchen table and laid it beside the small box we had rescued yesterday from behind the chair. The ribbon had a crease from the weeks it had been wedged, a faint white line where red fabric had folded itself thin. I set 2 mugs on the table and turned the kettle on low. When the water sighed, I called softly down the hall, and Marissa came hair tied back in a loose knot hospital band, still on her wrist like a quiet badge. I didn't tell her the whole story. I didn't need to. I just pushed the box toward her and said, "This one found its way home." She opened it slowly, as if sound might break a thing twice. Inside lay a small pie cutter, plain steel with a wooden handle, a gift I'd ordered early in December when the world still felt simpler. On the handle, the engraving I had asked the shop to burn in with gentle pressure. "You were always enough." The words were so small, the knife had to catch light for them to appear. She traced the letters with her thumb, set the cutter on the table, and looked at me, the way a person looks at a shoreline after a storm to see if the shape is still there. I texted the editor one sentence: "Thank you for correcting the record." Then I placed my phone face down and let the kettle hum. Outside, the ice on the stair rail reflected one thin thread of dusk, and a car passed tires whispering over sanded street. Inside, we sat 2 mugs steaming between us, the little cutter making a neat quiet on the table. The email noises stopped for a while. In that silence, I thought about how many kinds of credit a life holds: the kind on a page, the kind at a bank, and the kind you loan to people when you trust them with your child. You can fix the first with a note and the second with a new account. The third takes longer. It needs receipts with dates and a voice that doesn't shake. By morning, the brunch would give them a microphone and give me a podium with one line that did not tremble. The newsletter went back into its sleeve. The proof packet stayed on my desk. I rinsed the mugs and dried them with the gray scarf we'd finally brought home, the knit catching on a chip in the plate. Like a reminder, some edges don't sand down. You work around them. I set the scarf over the back of her chair and left the little cutter on the mat by the fruit bowl where it could catch the morning. The phone rested. The room held. The record for once had been corrected before the night was over. The hotel ballroom smelled like coffee and sugar, and the MC asked if anyone had a brief correction to announce. I rose from my chair with a steadiness that surprised even me. The light streamed in through tall windows, washing the round tables in winter brightness. I took in the layout as I walked forward, the editor stationed near the AV cart, Pastor Elena by the back doors, Callista balancing a cup of coffee, and across the room, Dorian and Isolde sitting stiff among a cluster of acquaintances. The MC nodded in my direction, offering the microphone as if it weighed nothing. My hand didn't shake. I gave the editor a small nod. She returned it, professional, not warm, but her acknowledgement was enough. The hum of the mic settled into silence, and the ballroom leaned in. I spoke clearly. The winter issue of our community newsletter misattributed a pie recipe. The editor has posted an online correction and scheduled a printed editor's note crediting Marissa. I didn't mention who had benefited from the mistake. I didn't need to. The truth stood on its own. There was a brief pause, then light applause, modest but sincere. My daughter's work had been acknowledged at last, and the record would show it. I allowed one more line, calm and precise. The timeline concerning Christmas Eve is being documented through vendor business records and custodian affidavits. We will present facts only. No theatrics, no displays, just the reminder that the case was rooted in professional, admissible evidence. A few people exchanged glances, others simply nodded. Then I closed with 6 words, the same ones I had carried since the porch keys: our trust. Trust wasn't honored. I handed the microphone back. No grand flourish, just clarity. The words hung there longer than I expected. As I returned to my seat, my phone buzzed softly. I glanced down. The HOA had replied, providing the noise incident time window, 10:00 to 11:15 p.m. It matched exactly with the vendor event log. Without a word, I forwarded the email to Malis with the subject line HOA window, aligns with vendor events. I set the phone face down and kept my eyes forward. When the brunch ended, I crossed the foyer. Pastor Elena stepped alongside me, promising she could provide a neutral attendance line if formally requested. The editor stopped just long enough to say, "Thank you for keeping it about the record." I answered, "People deserve to be named for their work." It wasn't gratitude, it was simply truth. As I reached the doors, I caught Isolde lifting her teacup without a smile. Dorian stared at the linen tablecloth as if the pattern itself might absolve him. I didn't approach them. I didn't need to. Outside, the cold winter light was blunt, almost cleansing. I texted Marissa before I pulled on my gloves, "Credit corrected today. You can rest." I laid the papers out, edge to edge. and for the first time the story looked like a straight line. On Melis's long oak conference table, the stack was orderly. The bar acknowledgement letter, the property receipt from the porch, the HOA timeline reply, the note Pastor Elena agreed to provide, and one space left open for the vendor affidavit. My checklist was simple signatures, then home. This wasn't theater. It was a process paper that protected instead of words that wounded. Her paralegal slipped in quietly at 2:15, placing 2 thin slips of proof of service on the table, like little flags, subpoenas served. My breath caught in a place deeper than relief. Stay with documents, not debate. Melis reminded me, her tone measured. I signed my name on the lines, waiting for me each curve of the pen, a quiet confirmation that the work was moving forward without noise. Then the ping came, an email marked certified delivery. I opened it to see the notarized affidavit from the doorbell vendor. Events at 7:39 and 7:51 p.m. Christmas Eve. Fully logged uptime, verified custodian signature sealed beside the notary's. Cold clarity, no embellishment. I initialed the receipt and slid it into the admissible tab. That one document tied together frost, silence, and laughter the night captured in neutral ink. The door opened and the atmosphere shifted. Dorian and Isolde entered with their attorney. No words of apology, no gestures of regret. Just signatures to give. The stipulation was placed in front of us. No contact, no trespass. A clause on attribution, no claiming Marissa's work, all corrections to be honored in writing. We signed. They signed. Dates, addresses, signatures, nothing more. The ink on the page spoke louder than any microphone ever could. Not long after, another email arrived. The editor had sent a proof of the upcoming issue, a printed editor's note, crediting Marissa and correcting the caption. The online fix was already live. I typed one line in reply. Thank you for naming the right hands. That was all it needed. The record had been corrected, not for pride, but for permanence. At home that evening, I sat at my desk with another call, this time to the insurance line. The ER codes were confirmed, co-pay capped, referral for a social worker included. I wrote down Marissa's therapy appointment in blue ink and slid the receipt into a folder labeled Health. Justice didn't just live in affidavits or court papers. It lived in making sure her follow-ups were covered, her care uninterrupted. The oven hummed in the kitchen, warm against the December chill. On the counter, I set the engraved pie cutter we had retrieved, its small handle catching the lamplight. The lattice pie cooled slowly. Marissa, in a thick sweater, leaned forward to take her first small bite. She looked at me with tired but safe eyes. I said 4 words I had meant since the first night, and still meant now: I'm glad you're here. No audience, no case number, just a mother and daughter at a table that held warmth instead of erasure. Later, I filed the stipulation, the deadbolt clicking once steady. On the table, I left a note for tomorrow. Mail copies to Pastor Elena. Send thanks to Callista. Cocoa at 7. Then I blew out the candle on the counter. The flame vanished, but the house stayed warm. The line we kept was simple boundaries, dignity and home. I'm an old mother, and here's what I learned. Quiet isn't weakness. It's choosing the tool that works. Records, boundaries. Community. In America, neighbors, churches, and honest paper can change outcomes. If someone chills you at your own doorway, warm your life elsewhere and write things down. Credit the right hands. Protect the vulnerable first. Argue last. Ask yourself tonight, what line will you keep? Who can witness for you and who needs you to witness for them? If this story touched you, drop a 1, or your city. If not, tell me why. Please hit subscribe for more gentle, strong stories and share with someone who needs a warm door.